We are coming up on a debt limit here in June.
Yes, early June.
No one should assume that the Fed can protect the economy.
But these negotiations should not take place with a gun really to the head of the American people.
The president has ignored this problem. I said, Mr. President, why don't we sit down and work through it?
It's Congress's job to do this.
I will not raise taxes, and we will not pass a clean debt ceiling.
Whether you pay the debt or not doesn't have a damn thing to do with what your budget is.
You know what happens with a compromise? We can get something together.
Let's get it straight. We're trying to hold the debt hostage to us to agree to some draconian cuts.
Debt ceiling drama unfolding in Washington, D.C. President Biden meeting with congressional leaders at 4 p.m. Eastern in the Oval Office, the first step towards cutting a deal to avoid default. The White House insisting on separating budget talks from the debt limit. Speaker McCarthy said on linking spending cuts to any increase in the ceiling. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell telling Bloomberg that he's got, quote, no secret plan to resolve the standstill. Annmarie joined us now in D.C. Morning, Annmarie.
Good morning, John. Well, you just outlined the status quo in Washington, D.C. going into this high-stakes meeting. But we need to remember, this is probably the first meeting of many if there were to be a negotiation and there was to be a deal before June 1st or in the few weeks in the beginning of June, because Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says as soon as June 1st, that is potentially when we can have the X date. What you're going to want to know coming out of this meeting is anyone softening these red lines, most notably the White House and, of course, Speaker McCarthy.
AMH, thank you. Much more from Annmarie through the day on Bloomberg TV and on Bloomberg Radio. Look out for Balance of Power a little bit later with Joe Matthew, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Don't expect any major breakthroughs today. That's the view from Henrietta Trays of Vader Partners. She writes the following. Investors should expect each side to stick to their current talking points with no new ground broken. We're not expecting any material breakthrough on negotiations until late this week at the earliest. Henrietta, I'm pleased to say, joins us right now. Henrietta, thanks for being with us. Let's talk about process before we talk about substance. How much negotiations do you actually think is going to take place a little bit later?
Today, I'm not expecting much of anything. I think both sides will sort of reiterate their point. Press will be available to take pictures. And we've all seen that in the last couple of rounds here, famously seeing former President Trump and Speaker Pelosi going into a room together with Senator Schumer and Senator McConnell. It's basically all the same figures again, just with Biden and Hakeem Jeffries replacing those other two. And I expect it'll just be a lot of handshakes, reiteration of their points. The one thing I'm really watching for is any indication that we're going to start tying this seriously to the federal spending bills. That, most prominently for investors, could be an early indicator that we're going to punt this entire debate into the late September period, which is the end of the federal fiscal year. So I'm encouraging clients to really focus on that narrative. Any mention of appropriations bills, fiscal year 2024, those are all buzzwords for, hey, maybe we just kick the can on this for a couple more months.
Lots of people are telling me it's important that Congress isn't really working this month. Do you have to pay attention to how little they're going to be around? Henrietta, is that important?
Honestly, I don't think so. They don't vote at the same time anyway. So I think, and in my experience now going back more than a decade, having 3, almost 4 weeks to hammer out a deal is plenty of time. This is all done by staff behind the scenes anyway. This is not something that you bring all of your rank and file members in on. This is a leadership decision, as evidenced by today's meeting. So I'm hoping that staff gets together at a senior level later on this weekend, as early as Thursday, I would say, and starts hashing out what I expect will ultimately be $300 to $500 billion in tolerable spending cuts that would come from clawing back COVID relief aid and things along those lines that can get them to a path where the Senate votes next week, then they go on recess, and then the House votes the following week, and then everybody departs for the Memorial Day break.